Moondrop makes some interesting and affordable IEMs. Their Starfield was a huge hit when it was first released. The Aria is essentially the same thing as the Starfield, but with a better fit, better accessories, and a cheaper price. Moondrop also has a top-tier IEM called the Solus, which costs $1,100. Recently, Moondrop released their cheapest IEM yet. They call it the Quarks. It's so new that it has not made it to the Moondrop website. Shenzhen Audio sent me the Quarks to review. Shenzhen Audio, along with Linsol and Hi-Fi Go, are among the handful of resellers that specialize in Hi-Fi products, both cheap and expensive. The Quarks is a $13 IEM. Does it surpass low expectations or set new standards? The Quark is a single dynamic driver IEM. The marketing says that the Moondrop spent 2 years in research and development to perfect the Quarks sound signature. Moondrop says that the Quarks will achieve a frequency response that exceeds what the ultra-budget price suggests. Moondrop claims that the Quarks will provide a neutral, natural sound. Moreover, this IEM allegedly has high-resolution clarity, whatever that's supposed to mean. I've been looking for an affordable, neutral IEM for a very long time. Moondrop promises exactly that. Let's find out if they are correct. For $13, your expectations should be comparatively low. The Quarks come in an unassuming and unpretentious package. Inside, you'll find the IEM, a carrying pouch, 3 sets of ear tips, and a basic manual. The manual recommends you wear these IEMs down. There are a few things that stand out about the Quarks. First, they are fairly small. The Quarks are made entirely of transparent plastic. There are red and black graphics on the back to indicate left and right ear tips. Second, the cable is non-detachable. That should not really be a surprise based on the price. But what was surprising is the quality of this cable. It is rubber-coated but quite malleable. It transmits little microphonics. I think this cable is superior to the one that Blon includes with their IEMs. Third, the ear tips are fairly standard. Despite the exceedingly low price tag, the Quarks ear tips seem to be well made. They are thicker than the ear tips Blon provides in their standard packaging and also offer better fit than the standard Blon ear tips. As for comfort, the Quarks are easy to wear for long periods. The ear tips fit securely and the IEMs do not tend to slip out of my ears even with rigorous head shaking. Overall, I was a little surprised with the build and comfort of this $13 IEM. You can easily break this thing if you put a little effort into it, but it won't fall apart in your hands with casual use. The fact that Moondrop includes spare ear tips in this price range, and decent ear tips at that, was welcome. And, of course, the carrying pouch is a bit unnecessary, but frankly, a good addition anyway. To test the Quark sound signature, I used it with various devices. I paired it with my Modi and Liquid Spark stack, the RME 80i2 DAC, the EcoZerta ITM03, and the Abasso DX160. I used the Stark ear tips. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. Without doubt, the Quarks are easy to drive. Any mobile device should provide plenty of juice. Adding a powerful amplifier makes no audible difference at all in this driver. Moondrop says that the Quarks is neutral. The bass response, in my test, seems to be very close to neutral. In Mountains by Hans Zimmer, the song has lingering sub-bass rumble from the beginning. The Quarks rendered this detail without difficulty. The transience was about average. This means that the rumble died within a few seconds. When the crescendo hit, the organ cut through the other instruments and was about one step ahead of them. The rolling thunder effect was audible, slightly elevated but not bloated. There was obvious melding among instruments, but nothing sounded veiled or muddy. When the vocals chimed in, they rose from the background until they were about shoulder to shoulder with the instruments. In Conquer by Overwork, there's a rolling marble effect at the beginning. This is supposed to pan from right to left to center. The Quarks clearly rendered the rolling sound, but not really the panning. There are multiple drums in this track, and the Quarks presented all of them. Each drum strike was hard, but not sharp or piercing. There was some melding among drum strikes, but nothing distorted. I listened to several hip-hop songs including Pure Water, New Patek, Reel It In, and Uproar. Without doubt, the Quarks fully recreated the sub bass. The subwoofer sounded like it was 5 feet away in a medium-sized room. The drums were a little louder. Separation between sub-bass and mid-bass was average at best. In other words, there was some melding between sub-bass and mid-bass. Vocals were one step ahead of the instruments and retained their sparkle. I tested the Quarks on my Sicario soundtrack. I used these songs to determine if drivers will distort on very bassy songs. I'm happy to say that the Quarks do not distort at all. Even at overwhelming volumes, these IEMs rendered sub-bass without bloat or distortion. Overall, I would agree that the Quarks appear to have a very close to neutral bass response. I think there is likely a marginal boost in sub-bass and a slightly greater boost in the mid-bass. Decay is average. Separation between sub-bass and mid-bass is also average. Again, Moondrop promises neutral mids performance. My test showed that this IEM has close to neutral mids with very marginal emphasis and sibilance. In Orla Gartland's song Why Am I Like This, there is natural vocal grain and sibilance mixed in. The Quarks rendered the vocal grain neutrally, without emphasis. The sibilance was just a hair above neutral. Compared to the Aventone planar, I could hear just a slight emphasis on the Quarks, but compared to the Allo Audio S4X, the Quarks were significantly more neutral in this regard. Orla's voice was one step ahead of the instruments. It was close to the ears. The drums and guitar had correct timbre, and there was some melding between these two instruments. In Want You Back by Haim, the Quarks just barely added emphasis to the primary vocalist sibilance. There was only a tiny deviation from how the Aventone planar performed in this respect. At 8 seconds into the song, the primary singer says the word "we" and drags it out, making it sound gravelly. The Quarks perfectly rendered this detail. There are 2 backup vocalists as well. The Quarks presented them with their individual separate tonalities when they first started singing. When the instruments played at maximum, the voices of the backup singers remained separate, and I could still pick them apart with a bit of concentration. The drums, piano, guitar, and bass all had correct timbre. Their notes all melded, but they did not sound muddy. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the Quarks correctly recreated the ukulele, drums, and bass. All instruments melded a little bit with each other. The sibilance of the primary male vocalist was neutral. His voice was smooth. There is a backup vocalist whose voice is layered beneath the primaries. The Quarks could not separate them. And this is par for the course, and very few IEMs and headphones can reveal this second voice. There are sharp intakes of breaths between 1 minute and 10 and 1 minute and 20 seconds. The Quarks perfectly rendered this detail. I listened to several songs by Guy Clark. These simpler compositions demonstrated the Quarks' ability to separate individual instruments from each other. While there was some melding among notes, each guitar was clearly audible, separate from any other in the mix. Guy's husky, gravelly Marlboro Man voice was distinct. Overall, I would say that the Quarks very closely come to neutral response. And, frankly, I'm happy to conclude that it does have mids that are neutral. The performance falls in between the Aventone planar and the Allo Audio S4X, and I simply cannot say there is any material emphasis or de-emphasis on the Quarks in this frequency range. Instruments and vocals are close to the ears. There is some bass bleed into the mids, and this results in full-sounding instruments. Clarity in this region is average. Moondrop says that the treble is neutral. My tests indicate there is a very slight roll-off in the mid to upper treble region, but otherwise close to neutral performance. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the Quarks clearly presented the brass and horns. They appeared to have just a tiny bit less energy with their higher-pitched notes than when I listened with the Aventone planar. The Allo Audio S4X adds a hint of energy above the planar's performance. The Quarks rendered the timpani audibly, and it did not sound bloated. I could hear group sets, but not individual instruments. There was no verticality or depth. In Flight from the City, the Quarks presented the piano as if it was about 5 feet away. The bassy notes were slightly accentuated, but not distorted or bloated. There was some melding among each successive note. I could hear the electric buzzing and pops and sizzles, which are details mixed into the bottom layer of this track. These details were a bit recessed, but unmistakable. The cello was smooth and melded a little bit with the piano. I could hear the creaking of wood in the pianist's bench and the shifting of the cello's weight, although again, these details seem to be just slightly recessed. In Take 5 by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, the Quarks presented the piano in the right, the drums in the left, saxophone center, and bass one step behind. The saxophone was smooth and appeared to have just a tiny bit less energy than it should when compared to the Aventone planar. All instruments melded, but nothing sounded muffled. The cymbals are hit at different angles in the song, which should result in varying tonalities. The Quarks presented the same tonality with each cymbal strike, however. Overall, the treble region has a slight roll-off in the upper or mid-treble area. It's not huge, I don't think. In fact, it might be pleasant for those who listen at higher volumes. There is about average clarity in this region. Moondrop says that the Quarks have high-resolution clarity. I have no idea what this means, but I can say that the Quarks have about average clarity and detail. The Quarks provide obvious details with no difficulties. Subtle details are not quite as sharp, but are usually audible. Multiple vocalists, creaking of wood, shifting of a cello's weight, pops and sizzles, electric buzzing, twangs of guitar strings, and sharp intakes of breaths are all apparent on this IEM. However, the Quarks are not a detailed-oriented IEM. Some details were a bit recessed. For a more quantitative test, I use the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including the sound of children playing, wind, rustling of grass, synth, piano, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. The Blonde BL03 presents 5 to 6 footsteps. The Tin Hi-Fi T2 presents 7 to 8. The T2 Plus and Blonde BL05S present 6 to 7. The Heidi's MS2 presents 8 to 9. The Moondrop Starfield presents 6. The Moondrop Aria presents 7. The Quarks provide 5 to 6 footsteps. The Quarks' performance is noticeably different compared to the Aria or Starfield, but it is similar to that of the BL03, and frankly, this result is consistent with the other tests I conducted. The Quark will provide obvious details in complex tracks. Subtle details will become harder to hear with very busy compilations, such as with New Light. The Quarks soundstage is nothing to brag about, but it is perfectly agreeable. The Quarks presentation is intimate. Vocals and instruments are closer to the ears. Reverberation is about average. Clarity is also about average. This IEM does not have depth or verticality. Indeed, the Quarks provide a true stereo left and right sound. However, the Quarks are also not muddy or veiled. While this IEM does not have an expansive soundstage, it's also not claustrophobic. Instruments do have sufficient room so that their notes do not become veiled or distorted. While separation of instruments is not particularly noteworthy, you can identify different instruments in most tracks. For the sake of comparison, let's talk about soundstage of other IEMs first. The Tin Hi-Fi T2 has above average soundstage. The Heidi's MS2 is similar in this regard. The Blonde BL03 and 05S are average, and perhaps slightly below average in soundstage based upon proper fit and ear tips. The Starfield and Aria are, I would say, average. In my opinion, I think the Quarks have soundstage that's somewhat similar to the Starfield and Aria. Keep in mind that ear tips and your original recording make a significant difference in soundstage experience. Moondrop says that they spent 2 years perfecting the Quarks sound signature. They claim it is neutral. Well, yes, I think the Quarks are pretty darn neutral. There are some deviations, but not significant in my opinion. For instance, I think the bass has a slight emphasis. You can tell mostly in mid-bass. However, this by no means makes the Quarks a bassy IEM. Separation between sub-bass and mid-bass is average at best. Bass clarity is frankly not groundbreaking. In fact, bass resolution is not this IEM's strong point. The bass also bleeds a little bit into the mids. The mids, however, are neutral. Female sibilance has a very, very slight emphasis, but nothing worth complaining about. The difference in this regard is nitpicking when I compare it against the Aventone Planar's rendition of sibilance. Vocals and instruments are close to the ears. There is some melding among all instruments, but no muddiness. All instruments have correct timbre. Vocals sound, well, for the lack of a better word, full. Treble has a slight roll-off in the upper or maybe mid-treble region. This means that while treble instruments for the most part do sound neutral, higher pitched notes might have a slight decrease in energy. Of course, the higher you go up in the audible treble range, the greater the roll-off will probably be. In my experience, most tracks did not sound as if treble was missing. Detail is average at best, similar to the BL03. Soundstage is similar to that of the Starfield and Aria. The Quarks provide a neutral presentation with minor deviations here and there. While some might want more treble emphasis and others might want more bass emphasis, the Quarks should satisfy those who want a more neutral sound. I think it is imperative that reviewers compare products A and B to put things into context. Here, I will compare the Quarks against the Blonde BL03, the Moondrop Aria, and the Tin Hi-Fi T2+. I used the stock accessories for each IM. I plugged them into my passive AB switch, which itself was connected to my RME 80i2 DAC and also my Modi Liquid Spark stack. I listened to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD, and of course I tried to volume match. The BL03 has greater sub-bass emphasis than the Quarks. The Quarks have more sub-bass and mid-bass separation and overall slightly more bass clarity. Mid-bass impact is a little harder on the BL03, however. The mids are forward on the BL03. Sibilance and vocal grain is noticeably greater on the BL03. The Quarks, by comparison, are closer to neutral. Separation of instruments is similar, but the Quarks are probably a little bit clearer. Timbre, however, is mostly the same. Treble is noticeably different as well. The BL03 has more of it. There is a spike in the mid to upper treble region on the BL03. The Quarks in this regard are closer to neutral, but there's also a roll-off near the upper end of the treble region on the Quarks. The Quarks have slightly greater clarity. Both IEMs have similar detail retrieval, but the Quarks have wider soundstage. The T2 Plus has sub-bass that is marginally rolled off compared to the Quarks. Transients is very nearly the same. Sub-bass and mid-bass separation is slightly greater on the T2 Plus. Mid-bass impact is harder on the T2 Plus as well. The mids on the T2 Plus have more sibilance. This is fairly obvious. However, the BL03 still has greater sibilance than the T2 Plus. The T2 Plus and Quarks place vocals similarly, that is, close to the ears. Instrument separation is a bit greater on the T2 Plus. Timbre, however, is the same. The treble is a little different on both IEMs. I think the T2 Plus has a marginal push in the mid to upper treble region. In comparison, the Quarks seem to have a reduction in that area. Clarity is similar, but the T2 Plus has just a bit more of it. The T2 Plus has greater soundstage and detail retrieval. The Aria has more bass, pure and simple. It has noticeably greater sub-bass and a greater mid-bass elevation. Separation between sub-bass and mid-bass is greater on the Quarks. Reverberation is a little bit longer on the Aria. Clarity is a bit greater on the Quarks. Mid-bass impact is a bit harder on the Aria. The mids are a bit more forward on the Aria. Sibilance is greater on the Aria, but vocal grain seems to be about the same as on the Quarks. The Aria's sibilance push is less than that of the BL03 and T2+. The Aria has a bit more melding among instruments and a bit longer decay. Timbre is the same. Drums in pop songs clearly are louder on the Aria than on the Quarks. The Aria and Quarks have different treble renditions. The Aria has a bit more energy in the mid-treble region and longer reverberation overall. The Quarks have a roll-off in the mid to upper treble region and slightly faster decay. The Quarks are a bit clearer and have more instrument separation. The Aria has a little bit more detail overall and about the same amount of soundstage as the Quarks. Ultimately, I can confirm through these tests that the Quarks are fairly neutral. While it does not excel in detail, soundstage, or other technicalities, the Quarks nonetheless provide respectable performance. If you want a warmer sound with more bass and a bit of treble kick, then the Aria may be your cup of tea. If you want more a V-shaped sound, then the BL03 might be to your liking, assuming you can find ear tips that work. And if you crave clarity and soundstage, but also want a bit of mid-bass boost, then the T2 Plus is a very good option. Clearly, all of these IEMs have their ups and downs. All of them have something unique to them, for better or worse. You may enjoy all, some, or none of them. Let's cut to the chase. The Moondrop Quarks are very good value. There is no reason whatsoever to drag this out. For $13, you get a comfortable IEM with comparatively good accessories. You get a neutral sound signature. You get overall average performance, which for a $13 product is outstanding if you ask me. I'm sure there are things we would all prefer the Quarks to have. For instance, I'd love a detachable cable. Others would probably prefer more traditional IEM design that would fit better into their ears. Still, some might want metal construction. But doing all of that would also increase the cost, which may or may not be an issue. I have been looking for a neutral IEM for a very long time. People have recommended the Etymotic gear, but I just can't get used to them. I have had Etymotic IEMs before, and I find the fit very uncomfortable. And if I can't wear something for more than a few minutes, then there's no reason to buy it. The vast majority of sub-$100 IEMs have one of two tunings, at least from my experience. First, V-shaped. Second, balanced. Every once in a while, you'll find a warmer sound signature, such as with the Aria NBL03. Sometimes you'll stumble onto smoother, gentler sound signatures, as with the Legacy 2 and the Shozi 1.1. But neutral, well, that's a different story. I am happy to say that the Quarks are a resounding success in my book. This is far from a perfect IEM, mostly due to build, and it certainly does not excel at technicalities. But it is a neutral-sounding IEM at an incredibly cheap price. Look, I use the Avantone Planar and Allo Audio S4X as my standard neutral headphones when I review headphones. The Quarks will now be my neutral IEM standard when I review IEMs. Yes, I highly and without reservation recommend the Quarks. If this is the sound and performance you're looking for, and if you can look past the lower tier build, then the Quarks is absolutely worth considering.